The United States is number one. Officially, we have more COVID-19 cases than any other country, including China. Each of us reacts to this news in our own way. We know something big is happening. What is this virus doing to each of us? I don't mean just those who have the disease, but to all of us. David Kessler is the world's foremost expert on grief. He co-wrote with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross the book called On Grief and Grieving, Finding the Meaning of Grief Through the 5 Stages of Loss. And then another book added one more stage to the process, and it's called Finding Meaning, the 6th Stage of Grief. Kessler shared his thoughts with the Harvard Business Review recently on why it's important to acknowledge the grief we may be feeling, how to manage it, and how he believes we will find meaning in it. So following is part of an interview with Kessler. He states, we're feeling a number of different griefs. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way, and we realize things will be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change, and this is the point at which they changed. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, the loss of connection, this is hitting us and we're grieving collectively. We're not used to this kind of collective grief in the air. He was asked what he meant by saying that we're experiencing more than one kind of grief. In his response, yes, we're also feeling anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is that feeling we get about what the future holds when we're uncertain. Usually it centers on death. We feel it when someone gets a dire diagnosis, or when we have the normal thought that we'll lose a parent someday. Anticipatory grief is also more broadly imagined futures. There's a storm coming. There's something bad out there. And with a virus, this kind of grief is so confusing for people. Our primitive mind knows something bad is happening, but we can't see it. This breaks our sense of safety. We're feeling that loss of safety. This is new. We are grieving on a micro and a macro level. The next question was, what can individuals do to manage all their grief? And his answer, understanding the stages of grief is a start. But whenever I talk about the stages of grief, I have to remind people that the stages aren't linear and may not happen in this order. It's not a map, but it provides some scaffolding for this unknown world. There's denial, in which we say a lot of early on, like, well, this virus won't affect us. And then there's anger. You're making me stay home and taking away my activities? Well, then there's bargaining. Okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be better, right? And then there's sadness. I don't know when this will end. And then finally, there's acceptance. This is happening. I have to figure out how to proceed. And acceptance is where the power lies. We can find control in acceptance. I can wash my hands. I can keep a safe distance. I can learn how to work virtually. When we're feeling grief, there's that physical pain and the racing mind. Are there techniques to deal with that to make it less intense? Kessler says, let's go back to anticipatory grief. Unhealthy anticipatory grief is really anxiety. And that's the feeling that you're talking about. Our mind begins to show us images like our parents are getting sick. We see the worst scenarios. That's our mind being protective. Our goal is not to ignore those images or to try to make them go away. Your mind won't let you do that. And it can be painful to try and force it. The goal is to find balance in the things you're thinking. If you feel the worst image taking shape, make yourself think of the best image. We all get a little sick and the world continues. Not everyone I love dies. Maybe no one does because we're all taking the right steps. Neither scenario should be ignored, but neither should dominate either. Anticipatory grief is the mind going to the future and imagining the worst. To calm yourself, you want to come into the present. This will be familiar advice to anyone who has meditated or practiced mindfulness, but people are always surprised at how prosaic it can be. You can name 5 things in this room. There's a computer, a chair, a picture of the dog, an old rug, and a coffee mug. It's that simple. Breathe. Realize that in the present moment, nothing you've anticipated has happened. At this moment, you're okay. You have food. You're not sick. Use your senses and think about what they feel. The desk is hard. The blanket is soft. I can feel the breath coming into my nose. This really will work to dampen some of the pain. You can also think about how to let go of what you can't control. What your neighbor is doing is out of your control. What is in your control is staying 6 feet away from them and washing your hands. Focus on that. Finally, it's a good time to stock up on compassion. Everyone will have different levels of fear and grief, and it manifests itself in different ways. A coworker got very snippy with me the other day, and I thought, that's not like this person. That's how they're dealing with this. I'm seeing their fear and anxiety. So be patient. Think about who someone usually is and not who they seem to be in the moment. One particularly troubling aspect of this pandemic is the open-endedness of it. This is a temporary state. It helps to say it. I worked for 10 years in the hospital system, Kessler said. I've been trained for situations like this. I've also studied the 1918 flu pandemic. The precautions we're taking are the right ones. History tells us that. This is survivable. We will survive. This is a time to overprotect, but not overreact. And I believe we will find meaning in it. Meaning. I've thought quite a bit about what came after acceptance. I did not want to stop at acceptance when I experienced some of my own personal grief. I wanted meaning in those darkest hours. And I do believe we find light in those times. Even now, people are realizing they can connect through technology. They're not as remote as they thought. They are realizing they can use their phones for long conversations. They're appreciating walks. I believe we will continue to find meaning now and when this is over. What do you say to someone who's feeling overwhelmed with grief, they asked. And he said, keep trying. There is something powerful about naming this grief. It helps us feel what's inside of us. So many have told me in the past week, I'm telling my coworkers I'm having a hard time, or I cried last night. When you name it, you feel it, and it moves through you. Emotions need motion. It's important we acknowledge what we go through. One unfortunate byproduct of the self-help movement is we're the first generation to have feelings about our feelings. We tell ourselves things like, I feel sad, but I shouldn't feel that. Other people have it worse. We should stop at the first feeling. I feel sad. Let me go for 5 minutes to feel sad. Your work is to feel your sadness and fear and anger, whether or not someone else is feeling something. Fighting it doesn't help because your body is producing the feeling. If we allow the feelings to happen, they'll happen in an orderly way, and it empowers us. Then we're not victims. Sometimes we try to feel what we're feeling because we have this image of a gang of feelings. If I feel sad and I let that in, it'll never go away. The gang of bad feelings will overrun me. The truth is a feeling that moves through us. We feel it and it goes, and then we go to the next feeling. There's no gang out there to get us. It's absurd to think we shouldn't feel grief right now. Let yourself feel the grief and keep going. Thank you very much.